Oh, hey there! Phil here from MTG Kiwi Philosophy. I'm bringing you a new deck tech. That's right, this time it's my green-black Explore deck. And if you like to get in there and get the beatdowns on your opponent, this is for you. Alright, I'll catch you on the flip side. Ciao. Green-black Explore beatdown. Okay peeps, it's time again to get into another deck tech, and this time we're going to go with another Exelon block deck, and this is my green-black Explore deck. Okay guys, well it wouldn't be a green-black Explore deck if it wasn't for this card here, and we're going to go with 3 copies of Path of Discovery. Now I do love Path of Discovery. It is an enchantment. It is 1 green and 3 others, so it's a 4-drop, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it explores. So exploring, when your creature comes into play, the chances that we're going to draw into either land or the creatures are going to get a +1 counter. So either way, this is going to help us ramp in our mana, or it's going to help us ramp our creatures to get them bigger. The best thing about Path of Discovery is that if we have multiple Paths of Discovery, we can start multiple counters, we can start doing multiple lands in our hand, or we can get best of both worlds, and we can get 1 land in our hand and a +1 counter on our creatures. This is going to help us thin out the land from our deck and make sure we get more creature drops. Okay, well enough about the talk of the Path of Discovery. Let's find out what we can discover is going to work with this deck, and we're going to go with the first of our few creatures, and we're going to start with our 2 drops, and that is 4 copies of Branchwood Walker and 4 copies of Seeker's Squire. So Merfolk Branchwalker is a 2-drop. It's 1 green and 1 black. When the Merfolk Branchwalker enters the battlefield, it explores. It's 2/1, so if it does get to explore, it becomes a 3/2. If we get a land, it stays a 2/1. However, if the Path of Discovery is in play when the Merfolk Branchwalker enters the battlefield as well, we get to double explore. So the chances of it becoming a 4/3 is very likely, or the chance of it becoming a 3/2 and we have a land in our hand. So we're always going to have that balance and the availability to be able to double up, or even if we can get 2 lands into our hand, it's going to thin the lands out of our deck and we hopefully won't get flooded. Now we're going to go with 2 2-drops, and the second of our 2-drops is going to be Seeker's Squire, except Seeker's Squire is almost the opposite of the Branchwalker, and that is that it's 1 black and 1 other, and it's a 1/2 with Explore. So when it enters the battlefield, it's likely to become a 2/3. If the Path of Discovery is in play, it becomes a 3/4. The best thing about this is we can have one that is aggressive and one that is defensive. And that is the great thing about these two. They're polar opposites, but also they're very the same. Okay, let's move on to our last 2-drop. Now this is not an Explore creature, but however, it does synergize with them very well, and that is 4 copies of Wild Growth Walker. Now Wild Growth Walker is a 1/3 for a 2-drop. It's 1 green, 1 other, and whenever a creature you control explores, you can put a +1 counter on the Wild Growth Walker and gain 3 life. Now that is beautiful. So we have a Wild Growth Walker into play, we have a Branch Walker, or we have a Seeker into the battlefield. We're going to be getting those +1 counters and gaining 3 life. The Walker gets stronger with a +1 counter. If the Path of Discovery is in play, not only are we going to be able to trigger it twice, but we have the Walkers or the Seekers being able to get the 2 +1 counters. The Wild Growth Walker gets 2 +1 counters, and we're getting 6 life. Oh geez, wow, this is so good. We're going to be able to get life, and we're going to get our creatures much tougher, and they're going to be harder to remove. We want to get our creatures out of the reach of Reaver Ambush and also Vanquish the Weak. We essentially want to render the early premium removal as useless and dead cards in our opponent's hands. However, they can cast it at instant speed before the creatures explore, but the idea is that if we can get it into play and get the counters on it before they can cast it, then we're going to be okay. Okay, so we've looked at our 2-drops. It's time to move on to our next creature, and that is 4 copies of Jade Light Ranger. Oh, I love the Jade Light Ranger. Yes, it's double green and 1 other, but it's still only a 3-drop. Well, when it enters the battlefield, it does explore twice. Jade Light Ranger to me is an aggressive card. With the double explore, it's coming into play. If we can get the 2 +1 counters on it, it's going to become a 4/3 creature. And the beauty of it is, if we have a Path of Discovery in play, and then we get another +1 counter, we're looking at a 5/4 3-drop creature. And on top of this, if we have the Wild Growth Walker into play, that is 3 counters on the Wild Growth Walker and 9 life. Whoa, yes. The synergy of these 5 cards working together is going to be perfect for our deck. So we've got 12 explore creatures and 1 creature that is 4 copies of the Wild Growth Walker, so that we can interact with the explorers is going to be great. And don't forget, the Wild Growth Walker is going to be able to interact with all of our creatures if we have a Path of Discovery in play. It's going to be perfect. Now that we have 16 creatures that interact with each other with Explore, I want to just throw in one more card, and that is a Shadowed Caravel. It's 2 colorless and it's a 2/2, but every time a creature explores, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and it's only crew 2. Now the beautiful thing about this card is it can just sit in the background, and often it's forgotten about. We can crew it and then swing in with a massive creature that we don't have to worry about losing, because it is going to be expendable to us. Now the other thing that I've got this in the deck for is because we are a 2-color deck, and if we are having problems with our mana, we need to be able to have something else in our deck that's always going to be castable, and it's always going to be able to synergize with our deck's main abilities. So we've got this Shadowed Caravel, and it is a beautiful card. Alright, let's move away from the Explore creatures and let's look at 2 other creatures that I've got in this deck that are going to help us synergize and get to our goals, and that is 4 copies of Tendershoot Dryad. Now, I love the Tendershoot Dryad. It is a 5-drop and it is a weak 2/2. However, the ability of it, being able to create Sproggling tokens every upkeep, whoa, that is really going to help us if we can get to Ascend. Ascending should be reasonably easy with the way we're exploring and getting more land into play, and also keeping those creatures in play because they're reasonably strong, that it's going to have no trouble ascending. And if we can get those Sproggling tokens out and keep them out, they're going to become 3/3 creatures, and that's going to be perfect for us because we're going to be able to go wider, and it's going to cause problems. And the best thing about the Tendershoot Dryad for me is what I believe, it's a little bit of a fake card, I call it. So we are really wanting our opponents to draw out their removal to remove this creature, and the reason we want that is because it's going to take the distraction away from our Explore creatures, who are just getting bigger and bigger and getting wider and wider. So the threat for them changes, and the threat is no longer about our Explore creatures constantly coming in and us getting a better board stake, but more about them trying to remove another threat that is going to become an even bigger problem down the line. So this is why we have 4 copies of this in our deck. Yeah, and I understand it is a 5-drop, that's 1 green and 4 others, and of course it is only 2/2. Doesn't matter. It is always effective late game. They're gonna have to use it to get it off the battlefield, and that's what I love about this card. And the beauty of it is every time those Sproggling tokens enter the battlefield and we have a Path of Discovery, they're going to explore, and if they get the +1/+1 counter, then we've got 4/4 tokens in play. And on top of that, if we have multiple Tendershoot Dryads, they get an additional 2/2, and then you're looking at 6/6 tokens, and that is just out of their league. Yeah, the beauty of it is if we have multiple paths and multiple Dryads, things just get really crazy and out of hand real quick for your opponents. Okay, well, let's move on. And I think this last creature is a doozy. It's a real beautiful piece of work for this deck, and it fits in perfectly. And the last of our creatures is going to be 2 copies of Golter, Primal Hunger. Now, I know what you're thinking. Golter is a 10 and 2 others, so it's a 12-drop. But it's also 12/12 trample, and the beautiful thing about Golter is he costs X less, where X is equal to the total power of creatures you control. So if we've explored a couple creatures and we've got a 3 and a 2, and then we might have a Jadelight Ranger who'll be 4, you're looking at Golter only really costing us about 3 to get into play. In late game, he only ever costs double green, and that might be seen as a downside for a lot of people, that Golter is double green, but you know, he's not. He's a great card, and when he comes in, and if we have Path of Discovery, he can become a 13/13. If we have multiple paths, he becomes a 14/14 potentially, and then he becomes the next big threat for our opponents to look at trying to remove, and they're going to be just shaking their heads saying, oh, it's beautiful. Alright, so these are our creatures we're going to look at, and these are the strategies we're going to look at, but now we must think about how we're going to remove some of our opponent's creatures. They're obviously going to be putting creatures into the battlefield to try and contest ours, and we need to make sure that we can be able to compete and remove theirs as well. And that is, we're going to go with 3 copies of Walk the Plank. Now, I do love Walk the Plank. The downside to it is, yes, it's sorcery speed, and it's also a double black, so we need to make sure we're getting our mana fixing good, but it is going to be able to remove one of your opponent's creatures as long as it's not a merfolk. But hey, when you think about it, How many merfolk are going to be bigger than our explore creatures anyway? They're out of their league. Don't worry about them. We just got to make sure we keep on building our board stakes and start rolling in and get the beat down on. Let's move on to our next piece of removal. And this is a 3-drop, but we're going to go with 4 copies of this, and I'll explain why. And that is Reaver Ambush. Now, I like Reaver Ambush because it's 1 black and 2 others, but it is instant speed. And it's not like Vanquish the Weak. We get to exile the target creature with a power 3 or less. And this is good for us because we want to make sure we can't have our opponents removing stuff from the graveyard and bringing it back, so that's costing us more and more spells to get rid of the creatures that we really want off the board straight away. I guess we could stick in 2 more copies of 1 piece of removal, and I think the best piece of removal they could possibly use in this deck, and that is going to be 2 copies of Vona's Hunger. Now, Vona's Hunger is an Ascend card, yes. It is black and it's 2 others. It's instant speed, but we really need to hold this card to get to Ascend, which we shouldn't have any trouble getting to Ascend with the board stakes we've got going on, with the amount of land drops we're getting in from the explores and the amount of creatures. It shouldn't be a problem at all. And the beauty of this is being able to use it in late game and remove half of our opponent's creatures. You know, it's going to make it even harder for them to defend as we're rolling in with the beatdowns. Now that we've discussed the creatures and the removal, let's talk about how we can strengthen our creatures and make them a little bit bigger to help roll over with the beatdowns. And that is going with 2 copies of Strength of the Pact. Yeah, it's a 6-drop sorcery, double green and 4 others, but it puts 2+1 counters on each of our creatures. So if we have the likes of our Seeker's Squire and our Branchwalkers in play, they've explored once each and got their +1 counters, dropping another 2 on top of those is going to be able to make them a little bit harder to deal with, and out of the range of some of those spells like Friendly Fire that's going to be able to deal 4 damage to our creature, or Bombard. These are the things that are really going to help. So it's taken us out of range of not only of the Vanquishers and the Reavers, but also the Bombards and also any of the direct damage like Lightning Strike as well. So this is going to really help us move along and get the beatdowns on our opponents, and they're going to have to use the premium removals only that can definitively remove our creatures off the board. The beautiful thing I love about Strength of the Pact is that if we have the Tender Shoot Dryad in play and we've got all those Spoggling tokens and they've explored to a 4/4 with the Path of Discovery, and then they get the +2s on them as well, they also become once again 6/6 creatures. And you know, things are really crazy at that point. You can even look at Golter getting +2 counters on them after they've explored as well. So you're looking at the possibility of, you know, having a 15/15 Golter, and that is really nice for us. Okay, let's move on to the last piece in our deck, and this deck really needs something that's gonna help strengthen it and help remove things and help get wide. And I think the perfect card for this deck is 3 copies of Vraska, Relic Seeker. The Planeswalker Vraska is great here. She is 1 green, 1 black, and 4 others, so she's a 6-drop, but however, when she comes into play, she is also 6 loyalty, which is great for us. And her first ability being +2 and creating a 2/2 black pirate token with Menace, that explores, that gets +1, and then we've got, you know, a 3/3 Menace with Explore. It's fantastic, you know. And then if we can get the Strength of the Pact on those as well, then they become 5/5 Menace. These are really, really good, you know. And the second ability with Vraska, -3, and we can destroy target creature, artifact, or enchantment, and we get treasure tokens as well. So that's really going to help us with our mana fixing. It's going to help us with our removal. It is really good. And last of all, the -10 for Vraska, our opponents' life total going down to 1 is ludicrous when we have such a wide beatdown for our opponents. They are just out of gas and they're out of luck. The only thing that I worry about when I'm playing against other people with Vraska in play, and that is if someone has the Immortal Sun, because we're not able to use our Planeswalker's abilities. So we have to make sure we've got things in the sideboard that are going to be able to deal with this. Okay, well, let's move on to our lands and get to our man bag, and let's see what we got. Okay, we're going to go with 9 forests, 9 swamps, 4 blooming marshes, and 2 Archers of Orazca. Now, the beautiful thing about Arch of Orazca, and the reason we have it in our deck, is the Ascend ability for us to be able to pay 5 and draw a card is going to be great when we've got all this land that's been getting into our hands or into play, so we're not having dead land just sitting there, because the worst thing about being an Explore deck is flooding, and then you have this land and you can't do anything with it. So the Arch is going to help us out with that. It's going to allow us to be able to draw cards and help us get to those things we need, and especially when we've explored something everything, and we can see what's on top of our library. We've put it back, we've given our creatures the +1 ability, and we know that we want to play that card. It could be something really important like a piece of removal, or it could be another creature that's going to help us get into play and then make our board even wider, more powerful. It could be strength of the pack, something that we can boost our creatures with and then start rolling over to get that beat down on our opponents. It could be something simple like another path of discovery. It's going to allow all of our creatures to explore twice. It could be even something as simple as land. Land's fine. Now let's move on to our man bag, and like I discussed earlier when talking about Vraska, we are going to need something that's going to remove the Immortal Sun, that is going to prevent us from being able to activate our Planeswalkers, and that is 2 copies of Naturalize. Now Naturalize is a great sideboard card. We can remove the likes of the Immortal Sun, the God Pharaoh's Gift deck, we can remove any of the Profane Possessions, we can remove Hadana's Climb, and all these other enchantments that are now coming into play, and they're becoming a main theme in a lot of the decks that we really want to shut down. Not much more needs to be said about Naturalize. It's a straightforward card, it does its job, it's business, and it gets out. Okay? Let's move on to our next card, and I think, this is a card for me that it's a hard decision to choose whether or not you should be using this in your deck instead of removal, because it helps in the early game, and it also does its job at a really cheap cost, and that is having 4 copies of Duress. Now the best thing about Duress is it's a 1-drop, it's 1 black, and it's sorcery speed. Yeah, sure, that's not bad, but I mean, early game, we can play it during our main phase, look at our opponent's hand, and remove any of these key cards that's going to help them. So if it's a late game card that we want to remove from their hand, like an enchantment or an artifact, that's fantastic. Or even if it's just early game, we want to remove the removal cards from their hand so that they're not going to be able to remove our creatures, because we want to start ramping early with our explore creatures. And I think that is the beauty of this card. I think if you're going to use it, you probably end up taking out removal like the Walk the Plank, because then you don't have to worry about the double black. You've got more consistency with casting your cards, and it's early removal. Okay, well, let's move on to the next card now, and that is 2 copies of Golden Demise. Now I do love Golden Demise. It is a double black and 1 other, so it does cost 3 sorcery speed and ascend. However, it's easy to get ascend in our deck, and if we hold this card till late game, we're going to negative our opponent's creatures 2/2, and ours are going to be fine. We're going to roll over with our big stompies, and it's going to be beautiful. Golden Demise is little bit clunky. If you're going to use it early game, it could cost you in the end, because your opponents can end up casting instant spells to remove our creatures or to protect theirs, and things can get ugly. So it's a certainty that you have to really wait to use this card until it ascends, and this is part of the reason why it's only in our sideboard. Okay, well, let's move on to another card which I feel is very important to have in our sideboard, and that is 1 more copy of the Shadowed Caravel. The Shadowed Caravel is a 2-drop, and it's 2/2, crew 2, and it also gets the +1 counters whenever a creature explores. So it is good just having an additional 1 in our sideboard, because I don't want to have too much, because having too much of one thing means that we're going to lose out on other stuff. So it's not a straight up creature. We have to crew something to be able to become a creature, and that is kind of a little bit why I've stayed away from this. And yeah, it's really powerful how our creatures explore and it becomes bigger, and yeah, it's an expendable creature if we want to use it instead of swinging in one of ours if we think our opponent's got a removal spell. So yeah, that is the upside to it. But yeah, let's move on to our next card that I think is quite important to our sideboard, and that is 4 copies of Winding Constrictor. Yes, that beautiful piece of work, the Winding Constrictor, 1 green, 1 black, 2/3. Or whenever we can put a +1 counter into play, it doubles that. So the +1 counters become 2/2 counters. So for example, when our creatures explore and they get the +1/+1, they're going to becoming +2/+2. And if we have a Path of Discovery into play, it's triggering twice. So our creatures are eventually going to be getting +4/+4. So it's a beautiful card. But the reason I haven't got it in the main deck is because I'm trying to keep things fresh. I don't want to go back to using the old combos, yeah, it works, but it's old. I want to keep it fresh. I want to use the new cards and give them a chance and be able to see how they synergize, because at the end of the day, the Winding Constrictor is going to be rotating out in September anyway. So, but don't count it out. It's a great card, and if you see that your opponent's not running a lot of removal, then by all means you can drop it into your deck and take something out, and then you can start thumping away on your opponents. Okay guys, let's move on to our last piece of work that's going to be in our sideboard, and that is 2 copies of Nissa Vital Force. Now I love Nissa Vital Force. She is great for this deck as well, but yeah, she's a 5-drop and she costs double green. It's one of those things, but once again, a little bit like Vraska, the cost you're paying for her is the loyalty you get. And you know, her abilities are pretty great for us. You know, her +1 ability is you can untap target land you control until the next turn it becomes a 5/5 elemental creature with haste. So the creature's going to come into play, and you know, we can possibly use that in so many different ways because we've probably got lots of lands with our explore happening, and if we can use a land as a creature and it becomes expendable, that is great for us. You know, this is second ability. We see -3 and we can return a permanent from our graveyard to our hand. That is fantastic. You know, being able to recycle those cards that have explored and they've done their work on the battlefield, they've been removed or they've traded, then you know there's nothing better than being able to pull something back from our graveyard, put it in a hand and explore it again. And of course Nissa's final ability, being able to -6 and get an emblem where whenever a land is the battlefield we get to draw a card, that is perfect for us. You know, if we can ulti her in a matter of 2 turns, it doesn't matter if she's not still on the battlefield. If we ulti her straight away and you know she's been in play for 2 turns, every time we're exploring and we get a land down our hand, we're going to be able to draw another card, and it is going to be really hard for our opponent to deal with that because we're going to be so far ahead, not only on the board stakes, but we're going to have all these cards in our hands, and it's going to give us more options and more plays. Okay, well that's it for me here at MTG Kiwi Philosophy. I'm Phil. I hope you've enjoyed this deck tech. I've tried to keep it fresh and use a lot of stuff that's in the Echelon block, so we're not going too out of our reach. The sideboard is using some other cards from standard, but at the end of the day, I just wanted to make sure I was keeping it fresh. But you know, if you like the video, make sure you share, make sure you like it, subscribe, tell your friends. You know, get it out there. I'm going to be bringing more of these videos. They're going to keep coming at you. All right, peace out, peeps. I'll see you around. Ciao.